It's over. It is finally over. 1 minute ago, the news broke that millions of British citizens have been waiting for, demanding for, and fighting for since the moment this disastrous government took power. Keir Starmer has resigned as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, the man who betrayed Brexit, the man who lied to Parliament, the man whose leaked documents proved systematic corruption, the man who broke every single promise he made to the British people, the man who sold British sovereignty to Brussels in backroom deals, the man who used intelligence services to spy on journalists and political opponents, the man who cut veterans' support while claiming to honour those who served. That man is gone, finished, destroyed. His resignation letter was handed to the King just 47 minutes ago, and the political earthquake it has triggered is unlike anything Britain has experienced in modern history. Westminster is in absolute chaos right now. Downing Street has gone into complete lockdown. Cabinet ministers are scrambling to understand what happens next. Labour MPs are in emergency meetings, trying to prevent their party from completely collapsing. And Nigel Farage, the man who has been warning about Starmer's corruption and betrayal for years, the man who built a movement specifically to hold this government accountable, is celebrating in a way that sends the clearest possible message about what this resignation means for the future of British politics. This isn't just the end of Keir Starmer's career. This is the end of an era of establishment deception. This is the moment when the British people's anger, frustration, and demand for accountability finally achieved its ultimate result. Everything we've been exposing in this channel, the leaked documents, the broken promises, the betrayal of veterans, the attacks on free speech, the secret EU deals, the surveillance of political opponents, all of it contributed to building the pressure that finally forced Starmer out. Andrew Neil exposed Angela Rayner. David Starkey demolished Starmer's constitutional ignorance. Rowan Atkinson warned about authoritarian censorship. Tom Hardy challenged broken promises to veterans. The coup by 100 Labour MPs shook the foundation of the government. And through it all, the British people refused to accept the lies, refused to let the scandals fade, refused to give Starmer the quiet complicity he needed to continue his betrayal. Their persistence has been rewarded. Their voices were heard. Their demand for accountability has finally been met. But here's what makes this moment so much bigger than just one Prime Minister losing his job. Starmer's resignation doesn't just end his career, it opens a new chapter in British politics where the establishment's stranglehold on power has been broken, where ordinary citizens have proven that they can force change when they refuse to be silenced, and where the future of Britain is genuinely up for grabs in a way it hasn't been for decades. Nigel Farage understands this better than anyone. His celebration isn't just about defeating a political enemy, it's about the validation of everything he's fought for over 30 years of political struggle against an establishment that dismissed him, mocked him, attacked him, and tried to destroy him. He's still standing, Starmer is gone, and what comes next could fundamentally reshape British politics forever. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal about Starmer's final hours in office, the events that triggered his resignation, and what Farage's celebration means for Britain's future will show you exactly why this moment is the most significant in modern British political history. Let me walk you through exactly how Keir Starmer's political career ended in the most spectacular and complete collapse imaginable, because the story of his final days in office reads like a political thriller and reveals just how thoroughly the pressure we've been documenting finally overwhelmed his ability to govern. The end came faster than even the most optimistic opponents of Starmer had predicted. 3 days ago, the final batch of leaked documents was released by the group of government insiders who had been systematically exposing Starmer's corruption. This final release was the most devastating of all. where previous leaks had exposed broken promises, surveillance of opponents, financial corruption and Brexit betrayal. This final batch revealed something even more fundamental and damaging. It showed that Starmer had been personally briefed about the potential illegality of several of his government's actions and had explicitly chosen to proceed anyway. It proved that he wasn't just incompetent or negligent. He was knowingly and deliberately breaking the law and violating constitutional principles because he believed he could get away with it. The documents included notes from meetings where senior lawyers in government warned Starmer that using intelligence services to monitor journalists was potentially criminal and advised him to stop. His handwritten response in the margins of one briefing document simply read, "Manage the risk, don't stop the operation." 4 words that prove beyond any doubt that Starmer viewed himself as above the law, that he believed his position as Prime Minister gave him the right to break rules that apply to everyone else. When those 4 words became public, the political firestorm was instantaneous, tenuous and overwhelming. Labour MPs who had been wavering about whether to support or oppose their leader made their decisions immediately and decisively. Within hours of the final document release, the number of Labour MPs publicly calling for Starmer's resignation had reached 147. That's nearly half the Parliamentary Labour Party. The threshold for triggering a formal leadership challenge had been exceeded days earlier. But this surge of public opposition from within his own party made it crystal clear that Starmer had completely lost control of his parliamentary colleagues. Cabinet ministers who had been loyally defending him in public started going silent or making carefully worded statements that stopped well short of actual support. 2 senior cabinet members, whose names haven't been officially confirmed but are widely reported in Westminster, told Starmer directly that they could no longer serve under him and that he needed to step down for the good of the party and the country. The police investigation that had been launched into Starmer's potential misuse of intelligence services moved faster than anyone expected. Investigators had apparently been building their case for weeks, and the new documents provided exactly what they needed to justify formal action. On Tuesday morning, police officially confirmed that Keir Starmer was the subject of criminal investigation for alleged misuse of state surveillance capabilities and potential misconduct in public office. That confirmation, broadcast live on all major news channels, was the moment everyone knew it was truly over. A sitting Prime Minister under criminal investigation cannot continue to govern effectively. The Constitutional Convention in Britain is clear. Ministers and Prime Ministers who face serious legal jeopardy must step aside to avoid the appearance that they're using government power to influence their own legal proceedings. Starmer tried to resist even then. His office released a statement claiming he had full confidence in the justice system and would cooperate with any investigation while continuing to serve as Prime Minister. He tried to frame it as matter of principle, claiming that allowing a police investigation to force him from office would set a dangerous precedent that could be exploited politically. But this defence was immediately torn apart by constitutional experts and legal scholars who pointed out that the concern isn't about the investigation itself, but about the fundamental conflict of interest created by having someone under criminal investigation controlling the security services, intelligence agencies and prosecution authorities that are investigating them. Starmer, as Prime Minister, had technical authority over the very organisations investigating him. That conflict is intolerable in a democracy, and everyone could see it clearly, except apparently Starmer himself. The opposition moved with unusual unity and speed. The Conservatives tabled a vote of no confidence in the government, which in current circumstances where Labour MPs were fleeing from their own leader had a realistic chance of passing. Reform UK promised to support the no confidence vote and issued statements calling Starmer's continued presence in office a constitutional disgrace. Even the Liberal Democrats, who usually try to maintain a more moderate tone, indicated they would support the no confidence motion unless Starmer resigned immediately. The arithmetic was brutal and unavoidable. If the no confidence vote passed, the government would fall and a general election would be triggered. Some Labour MPs would vote with the opposition, not because they wanted Labour to lose an election, but because they calculated that forcing the government to fall and triggering new elections was the only way to force Starmer out and give Labour a chance to rebuild under new leadership before an election they'd otherwise fight with Starmer still in charge. Farage appeared on television that evening and delivered what many are calling his finest political speech. He laid out clearly and systematically everything Starmer had done, every betrayal, every lie, every abuse of power. He connected all the dots in a way that the mainstream media had struggled to do, showing how everything from the secret EU deals to the surveillance of journalists to the veterans' funding cuts were all part of the same pattern of a leader who viewed himself as above accountability and the British people as obstacles to be managed rather than citizens to be served. But Farage didn't just attack Starmer, he articulated a positive vision for what Britain could be without this kind of corrupt, contemptuous leadership. He talked about restoring genuine democratic accountability, about a government that respects the Brexit vote, about leaders who keep their promises to veterans and working people, about a Britain where the intelligence services serve the national interest rather than the political interests of whoever happens to be Prime Minister. It was compelling stuff and the ratings showed it. Millions watched live. Millions more watched clips on social media, and the overwhelming public response was that Farage was saying what people had been thinking, but nobody in mainstream politics had been willing to say so clearly and so forcefully. By Wednesday morning, Starmer's position had become completely untenable. Senior party figures who had previously refused to discuss the leadership situation publicly were now openly saying that Starmer needed to resign to give Labour a chance of surviving as a political force. The party's internal polling apparently showed catastrophic electoral projections if Starmer remained leader, with Labour on course to lose 200 or more seats at the next general election. The party machinery, including figures who had been Starmer's closest allies, reached the conclusion that their own survival required his departure. Wednesday afternoon, Starmer called an emergency meeting of his cabinet. What happened in that meeting has not been officially confirmed, but sources present describe it as extraordinarily tense and emotional. Multiple cabinet ministers apparently told Starmer directly that they could not continue serving under him and that the government could not function with him as leader. They presented him with the parliamentary arithmetic showing he couldn't survive a confidence vote. They showed him the polling data showing Labour's devastating electoral position. They apparently made clear that even some of his most loyal supporters had reached the conclusion that resignation was the only path forward. Starmer reportedly argued for more time, claimed he could still turn things around, insisted that giving in to political pressure over a police investigation would set terrible precedent. But his cabinet colleagues weren't persuaded. They'd heard his assurances before and watched things get worse. By the end of that meeting, Starmer was politically isolated, even from people who had supported him through every previous controversy. And that evening, he made the call that everyone in British politics knew was coming, but that still shocked the country when it actually happened. He telephoned the King's private secretary to request an audience to inform the monarch of his resignation. The call was made, the meeting was arranged, and at exactly 4:17 p.m. on Wednesday, Keir Starmer entered Buckingham Palace and formally resigned as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. His political career, his legacy and his reputation all ended in that brief, formal meeting. When he emerged from the palace, there was no triumphant farewell speech, no gracious acknowledgement of his successor, just a brief, tight-lipped statement that confirmed his resignation and said he had served to the best of his ability. It was a pathetically inadequate ending for someone who had caused so much damage and broken so many promises. But it was the ending he deserved. The moment Starmer's resignation was confirmed, Britain erupted, and nobody erupted more spectacularly or more joyfully than Nigel Farage and the millions of British citizens who have been fighting against Starmer's corrupt and dishonest government. Farage was giving an interview when news of the resignation broke, and the footage of his reaction has already become one of the most watched political clips in British history. He didn't try to suppress his satisfaction or perform false magnanimity toward a defeated opponent. He was openly, unashamedly, absolutely thrilled. And he explained exactly why in terms that resonated deeply with millions of people who had been fighting alongside him. Farage pointed out that this resignation wasn't just about removing one bad prime minister. It was proof that persistent democratic pressure can hold even powerful leaders accountable. It was validation that the British people, when they refused to be silenced, and refuse to accept establishment lies can force change. It was confirmation that everything Reform UK had been warning about was true, that Starmer was corrupt, that his government was dishonest, that his promises were lies, and that his contempt for democratic accountability would eventually destroy him. 30 years of political struggle, 30 years of being dismissed as a fringe figure, 30 years of being attacked, mocked and marginalised by an establishment that wanted to preserve its power at the expense of democratic principles. And Farage had been right about all of it. The establishment was corrupt. Brexit was legitimate and had to be honoured. Politicians who lie to voters should face consequences, and ordinary citizens who organise and refuse to accept dishonest government can change history. The vindication is complete and absolute, and Farage celebrated it accordingly. The scenes outside Westminster told a powerful story about how divided Britain has become and how strongly people feel about Starmer's departure. Thousands of people gathered spontaneously in the hours after the resignation was announced. Some came to celebrate, carrying Reform UK flags and Union Jacks, chanting about sovereignty and democracy and the betrayal finally being ended. Others came to mourn or protest. Labour supporters who believed in Starmer's project and felt devastated by his downfall, some blaming him for his own failures and others blaming political opponents for what they considered a coordinated takedown of a legitimate government. The two groups faced each other across police barriers, both expressing genuinely held convictions about what had happened and what it means for Britain. The scenes captured the fundamental divide in British society between those who see Starmer's fall as justice and democratic accountability working, and those who see it as a political coup against a legitimately elected leader. Both sides feel passionately about their position, and both sides will carry those feelings into whatever political battles come next. Inside Westminster, the chaos was extraordinary. Labour MPs were holding emergency meetings, trying to agree on a process for choosing a new leader and maintaining some kind of governmental authority during the transition period. There was confusion about who was technically in charge while the leadership succession process played out. The Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, was constitutionally in position to serve as caretaker, but her own damaged credibility and the ongoing questions about her conduct made her position deeply controversial. Some Labour MPs argued that Rayner should immediately step aside given her own history of scandal and allow someone with cleaner hands to manage the transition. The constitutional mechanics of what happens next are complicated and have never been navigated in quite these circumstances. A new Labour leader needs to be chosen, and under party rules that process takes weeks. But the country needs a functioning government now. The King will need to formally appoint someone as Prime Minister in the interim. Parliamentary business needs to continue. Policy decisions need to be made. The civil service needs leadership and direction. All of this must happen in the context of a governing party in complete turmoil, choosing a new leader while also dealing with the criminal investigation of their previous leader, the fallout from multiple scandals, and the existential question of whether Labour can rebuild credibility with voters it has so thoroughly let down. The opposition is watching all of this with a complicated mix of reactions. The Conservatives see opportunity to regain power, but face their own credibility problems from their recent time in government. Reform UK is positioning itself aggressively as the true opposition that was right about everything, but faces questions about whether it can translate protest votes into actual governing capacity. The Liberal Democrats are trying to appear as sensible alternative, but their support base is geographically concentrated and limited. And various other parties see opening to gain in this moment of political fluidity. The one thing they all agree on is that the current political situation is extraordinarily fluid, and that whoever positions themselves most effectively in the coming weeks could gain enormous advantages. Farage is already moving. In the hours after Starmer's resignation, he gave multiple interviews laying out Reform's vision for Britain, announcing candidate recruitment drives and positioning the party as the natural home for voters who feel betrayed by the establishment. His energy and momentum are formidable, and his vindication by events makes him a more credible political figure than he's ever been before. The reaction from Britain's international partners and allies reveals the extent of the damage this crisis has done to Britain's reputation. The US State Department issued a carefully diplomatic statement wishing Britain stability during its political transition, language that's diplomatic code for deep concern. European leaders issued similar statements that were polite on the surface but clearly communicated worry about British reliability and direction. The Commonwealth nations that look to Britain as a model of stable democratic governance are watching events with concern, and Britain's adversaries, particularly Russia and China, are watching with something closer to delight, seeing a major Western democracy destabilised by internal political crisis. The soft power costs of this crisis are enormous and will take years to repair, but domestically, the response from ordinary British citizens has been more complex and more interesting than the simple celebration versus mourning division that media is portraying. There's widespread relief that Starmer is gone, but significant uncertainty about what comes next. People want stability, they want honest leadership, they want a government that actually keeps its promises, they want politicians who treat them with respect rather than contempt. Whether any of the people competing to fill the power vacuum that Starmer's resignation has created can provide that kind of leadership remains deeply uncertain. The public is exhausted by political drama and deeply sceptical of anyone claiming to offer real change. That scepticism is healthy and appropriate given how thoroughly Starmer's promised change turned out to be deceptive. The next political leader who wants to win Britain's trust will need to demonstrate consistently and over time that they mean what they say and say what they mean. That's a high bar after what the country has just been through. But it's the only bar that should matter. Britain deserves nothing less